Hello, and welcome to U.S. Mortality Trends through the pandemic. This is part 4 of a series, and today, this part 4 is solely focusing on looking at the cause of death being COVID. So, what do I mean by counting COVID deaths? This is still going to be controversial no matter what. However, I'm only counting where COVID is considered the underlying cause of death. Now, this is an issue because there is a CDC COVID death tracker where they do count COVID deaths where it's anything, where it's the contributing cause of death or underlying cause of death. For each death certificate, there is one and only one underlying cause of death. And this is supposed to be whatever drove, like it's the but for, like you would not have died except for this thing. So that you had COVID and you were in a car accident, unless that COVID for some reason directly caused that car accident, which is very unlikely, that would not count as a COVID death, though it could have been a contributing factor, like you were the driver, or perhaps, you would have perhaps survived of your injuries, or you were a little more fragile because you had COVID, okay, in a car accident. It's possible. In any case, on a death certificate, standard death certificate, you can have up to 20 contributing causes of death listed. You don't have to list any contributing causes of death, but you must, one and only one underlying cause of death. What many people do not know, and I have checked it out myself in recent years, the average number of causes of death, and this is including that underlying cause of death, has been increasing past 3. The average number, that is. And I'm not going to give you a distribution, but just FYI. So when people have said, there have been people who have claimed, no, it's not COVID because there were contributing causes of death. Well, almost everybody has contributing causes of death on their death certificate. So that there are other things listed, such as, say, diabetes or heart disease or something like that as a contributing cause, but that COVID is the underlying cause, that doesn't mean it was, the heart disease or diabetes. Probably it was the COVID, that they could have lived for many more years if they had not had COVID, okay? So let's be real here. That said, so when you look at the count and split out, and I have done data draws and I'm not going to show them here. There are a certain number of deaths where COVID was a contributing cause of death, but not the underlying cause of death. Unfortunately, those are often the numbers that are given in the headline in the news because the CDC made that COVID deaths tracker easy for media people to use. But CDC Wonder, which is the database I use to get my data, is not very user friendly. Okay, for someone who's used to querying databases like me, I find it easy, but most people are not going to find it easy to use. So here we go. I'm going to start out very simply. I did it by quarter. Now you might be going like, now why quarter? Okay, so I had a work reason to do it by quarter because this is kind of how we do things in finance. Every 3 months. So we have 4 quarters. So January through March, then we have April through June, July through July through September, and then October through December. Those are our 4 quarters. But it also kind of lines up with seasons where we have winter, spring, summer, and fall. Okay, so first quarter is kind of wintry. Second quarter is kind of spring. Third quarter is kind of summer. It's not exact, okay? And obviously weather does differ geographically somewhat. But if we look at this, and so I do the non-COVID deaths in the dark blue and COVID deaths in the light blue, you can kind of see that in the first, I start in 2020. So first quarter, maybe something was going on, but it's hard to see. Second quarter is when we saw those initial spikes of COVID deaths. And then we had some in that third quarter in the summer of 2020. Then going into the fall and winter, so fall of 2020 into the winter of 2020 to 2021, that's when we saw our first big wave of COVID deaths throughout the United States. But then spring 2021, almost no, I mean, it's not zero, but there were almost no COVID deaths in spring 2021. We saw that also in 2022. Think about it. So we kept seeing this collapse in COVID deaths in the spring. But in the summer of 2021 and then the fall, we saw that Delta variant come in, and then the Omicron, we had this Delta Omicron. We saw peaks in terms of COVID deaths, but it was over this longer period, and then we see these small amounts. You can see, and I have this yellow line for contrast, where I had the total number of deaths for the same quarter in 2019, so we can have a comparison. So you can see this dark bar, which represents the non-COVID deaths officially for the same quarter, Q1 and Q4 for 2021. You can see there's a lot of non-COVID excess deaths if you consider 2019 to be our baseline, and I do. But you can see that, say, a lot of the excess deaths, as it were, is coming from COVID in Q1 of 2021. But then we're starting to get a lot of other things by the end of 2021 and into 2022. And, 2022 Q4, a lot of non-COVID excess mortality. So you may be thinking, well, this video is supposed to be about COVID deaths. And yes, it is. And I'm going to be getting into that in the next slide. But, looking at this, we see, okay, maybe COVID, and, we're going to be getting into 2023. I just didn't like how complete the data were for Q1 of 2023. So that's why it's not here yet. As more data come in, I'll update this throughout the year. COVID deaths, well, we might have continuing COVID deaths into the future, just as we do with flu. And then this will be part of the annual mix of infectious disease deaths. And it'll be something that we have to deal with. However, it does seem that there may be excess mortality from all sorts of other causes. And this is something that needs to be investigated. It may be after effects of earlier COVID infections, not sure. I don't have that kind of information coming from death certificates because I don't get a health history from a death certificate. All I'm going to get, I might have contributing causes of death, so I'm not getting into that analysis. I can only get aggregate information given the kind of researcher I am. They won't give me access to that. I mean, they don't want me to have information at the individual level. I understand. I mean, it's individual privacy concerns. So now we're getting into the death rates by age group. And I'm using the 5-year age groups except past age 85. Yes, some people have asked me, well, can you do 85 to 89, etc. The problem is, and the problem doesn't come from death counts. The numerators for these rates are fine. It's the denominators of the population estimates for the older ages. And so that's why I, drop it off at 85 plus. So I'm going to start out with my rates using the linear scale, which a lot of people feel like they understand. So let's take a look at the shape of these curves before I get to the logarithmic scale. The 2020 is the dark blue. What's interesting is what happened with the 2021, that we had a higher rate at younger ages, but a lower rate at older ages. And then, of course, in 2022, the death rate from COVID only was much lower compared to both 2020 and 2021, which is yay. We're very happy about that. Um, but the question is, how will this evolve in years to come? Uh, we're expecting, of course, the COVID death rate to be lower, and not just because we'll have better treatments and improved vaccines, I'm assuming, but that we had the Q1, and I'll go back to that. So if you look again, we have this big spike of deaths in 2022 Q1. So we're not expecting COVID, this huge spike of deaths. We're hoping it'll be more like these smaller amounts of COVID deaths in Q1. But you have to remember, this is what the flu pattern looks like when we have bad flu years. Most of the flu deaths come in the first quarter. Actually, most of them come in January and February. So this might be COVID settles down into kind of the seasonal flu death pattern. So now let's look at the COVID death rate graph on the logarithmic scale so that we can kind of see better. Now it makes a lot more sense. This is when we look at it, when it's that exponential curve, it's really harder to see what it looks like. You might as well just be looking at a table of numbers. In that case, you can't actually see anything, especially for these ages in here. But now that we look at it, obviously 2021 was our worst COVID year. But if we look at 2020, this is our dark blue, and the 2022, this may give us an idea. So you can see this 2022 line is looking a lot more like a straight line, especially past, like, once we start 25 and older. Once we get, down here with children, it's the messy kind of graph. It's really adults that we are seeing that normal kind of frailty with age line that we're used to. And perhaps this will give us an evolution of COVID mortality where maybe this line will start to pivot and come down, so that we'll have lower rates over the years, and we can kind of maybe project an evolution to these mortality rates to years to come. Because I'm not necessarily, given what we've seen in the trajectory of COVID death rates so far, I'm not necessarily expecting it to just get extinguished. This seems to be something that will be endemic, similar to flu. I could be wrong. Maybe it will just poof, go away. But remember, a lot of cold viruses are coronaviruses, though obviously not deadly. And flu keeps coming back. It is obviously worse for the most vulnerable. And the way people are dying, I mean, it's the people who are, least able to, at least able to come back from the ravages of the disease. So, like, flu can be pretty bad for a lot of people. I just keep coming back to flu, but there's a lot of infectious diseases like that. When you're young, it can do damage. You can feel like hell, but you will recover. You'll feel like crap for a while, but then you come back. For COVID, we're still learning things about it. Does it cause longer term damage? And this is one of the things, and I'll just go back, that, we question. Look at this, spike in increased mortality here. Yes, seasonally, we expect heightened mortality in, say, Q4 and Q1. However, is some of that coming from extra mortality from the ravages of an earlier COVID infection? I don't know. Maybe. It could be from other things as well, of other situations, and we'll be looking at some non-COVID causes of death in upcoming parts of this. I'm not going to throw all of the dozens of slides at you at once in the upcoming videos, but we'll break these out by causes of death, the top ones like heart disease and cancer, and then some of the external causes of death, such homicide, suicide, drug overdoses, those kinds of things. And where might this excess mortality be coming from? And is it something that is going to persist? So these are things that will be coming up, but for COVID, it's likely to be around for a while, though again, the magnitude of it may be a lot less than obviously what we saw in the past. But of course, it could come and go in waves where we'll have, maybe a bad COVID year and an okay COVID year, just like we have bad flu years and, okay flu years. So something for us to look forward to, I guess. So we'll see you in future parts.